Welcome back. In this demonstration, we're going to do the inking for our anime or manga portrait, okay? In this lesson, I want you to be thinking about your line and your shape. First of all, our line, taking our inked picture from a penciled picture, you want to be very focused on your line and how your line is laid down and in what direction it's going. You also want to think about the shape of your line. We did talk about making things for our line being thin versus thick. Sometimes you might want to have a thicker line like the eyebrows, and sometimes you might want to have a thinner line like this hair. Also, in this lesson, I'd like you to start thinking about what's called implied line. Implied line is where a line starts, maybe has a gap, and continues through the process. One trick about implied line is that you leave the line out wherever the brain can fill it in. So like right here on this jaw, the brain's gonna fill in this little line here on the jaw because there's nothing there that would lead it otherwise. Whereas if I were to leave out this chin part, that might be a little bit more confusing for the brain. I might say, oh, that's kind of an important part. It helps me figure out where the chin is. So you want to leave out lines that are less important, but keep the lines that are very important. Now, I'm making this demonstration in Vietnam. Usually in the US, I would say use a Sharpie because I really like that brand of marker. But I'm in Vietnam and I can't find Sharpies, so I'm using one that's called a TL marker, permanent. The deal is it is so permanent and so powerful, it bleeds right through the paper. You can kind of see the bleeding here. So I'm going to make sure that you have a brown piece of paper like this for inking so that you don't get the ink into the tables. Also, it bleeds so much and goes through so much that it actually stains other papers. So if I were to leave this paper face down on this other piece, the ink actually bleeds out from the top and turns the papers brown. If you want to see an example of that, I have it in the one or in the demonstration where I inked this female face. So think about that, the inking nicely and neatly with your lines and the bleeding through. Okay, the purpose of inking is so that we can get rid of all of the preliminary guidelines that we use to help us get our proportions in. So as you get started, you have to figure out what part you want to start on. I'm going to start up here on the top part. You can also do the bottom, whatever works best for you. But you do want to think carefully about where you are inking and what you are inking. All right? So whenever you have a line like this curve for the circle that we originally did, we want to make sure you don't do that. Also, you can change your lines a little bit. See how I just changed that one to make it parallel? You can change things as you work if that works out for you. And if you've got things that are overlapped, it's best to make sure that they look really nice and overlapped, like this little piece I just put in behind the ear. Okay, now as far as our inking goes, notice I left a little gap right here for implied line, and I'm going to leave another one here. Okay. And as you do this, the eyes for the male. Let's have the discussion about eyes. One thing that will help your male characters look more male is if the eyelid line, the eyelash line there is a little thinner. So here on this female portrait, I made this eyelash line quite thick. For your male characters, you're going to want to make it fairly thin. So I'm just going to take this and do a very quick line across to indicate the thin line here for the eyebrows. And then here on this line, I'm just going to make it nice and thin. That will help your character look more decidedly male than female, because the females usually have very dark lines. Notice how I'm leaving a little implied line down there and curving these two around like so. And then for our shine in the eye, I'm going to circle it first and do the upward part of that diagonal line and then fill this eye in carefully. Okay, now in class when we start painting these, we are going to be painting all of this over with actual paint. So you don't necessarily even need to ink these in class, but it is kind of fun. It makes the drawing really stand out and look really nice if you take the time to ink. So you could make more than one, obviously, since it's such a quick, easy process. And then the idea at home is that you're practicing your manga portrait so that when you come to class, you can do it very easily. Here's our nose piece. I'm going to leave that piece open as a shape, and I'm going to start this line right here for his chin, or rather his jaw, and leave that same implied line like so. Get these ears taken care of. And our little hair fluffs down here. Alright, and the last but not least, get his shoulders on here. Now I just made that implied line kind of in the wrong place. Alright, now we've made sure to ink everything up, yet leave in a few implied lines. And now I'm going to just take my eraser and make sure that I erase nicely. When you erase, make sure you press down hard. One thing I find is if you go back and forth like this, many students tend to bend their paper. So if you can go back and forth, that's fine. But I find that if you just kind of go one direction with it, that tends to work better, especially for students who are kind of erasing for the first time. All right, now once you get done, you want to have all of your guidelines and circles and extra little scribble marks or whatever all erased out. Now in class, we're going to actually be painting on this, so we could just leave the pencil lines and use those as guides as we paint, but it's kind of fun to see the final product without any pencil. It looks cleaner, looks nicer, especially if this is the first time you're going to be starting a painting. It might be helpful to not have all of that background distraction of guidelines and such. Now these are very large portraits we're making, usually manga being a cartoon, being in like comic book style, you would be making much smaller versions. So this one is kind of large in that sense. So there's a lot of erasing and a lot of painting that's going to go into this. And we're going to be doing this in some kind of painting style, whichever painting style I choose to be teaching about. We'll fill it in with that painting style. So there's my inked up male portrait, male manga portrait, thinking of thin line versus thick line, implied line, and of course making some shapes out of our lines, but most of all making sure we're making thoughtful artwork and making neat drawings.